going forward. So
yeah, there we go. Hello.
Can you hear me?
How are you? How are you?
Are you well?
I'm good.
Brilliant.
Thanks a million for joining us.
Absolutely.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're very kind. So what's going on? It looks very white and serene and beautiful in your house.
I have my lamp right here. I was like messing with lighting. No, I wasn't really. I'm actually afraid that the electricity is going to go if this storm hits Limerick, but for the moment we're okay anyway.
Lovely. For anybody joining us, if you're having any issues in terms of your bandwidth or connection and stuff, don't worry, we are recording this and you can check back in on this and watch it again in the future. Nicola, you're in Limerick, right?
I am in Limerick, yes. Yeah.
Very good. How's it going?
Out in the middle of the sticks.
Very good. So for those of you who are watching who don't know what Nicola does, what do you do, Nicola?
What do I do? So I'm a CBT therapist, cognitive behavioural therapy. It focuses really on our thoughts and our feelings and how they impact on our behaviours. So what I'm thinking will affect how I act and also how I feel. So it's the thought process really, and also our perception of a life event and how we think about something. So it's about identifying those thoughts. We all have automatic thoughts. We actually don't have control over having the thought because it's an automatic process. But what we do have control over is how we use that thought, or I suppose how we behave when we have that thought. So it's about identifying dysfunctional thoughts that might be negative, challenging them, fitting them with the reality of, I suppose, the life event that's happening, and then reframing it if necessary. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I suppose it's almost like, you're walking down the street and you see your friend Mary, okay? And Mary doesn't say hi to you. And that evening you go home and you're rightly annoyed with Mary. So your behavior then might be that when Mary rings you, you just don't bother answering the phone, or you're annoyed with her because your first thought was, Mary's after ignoring me. However, if you see that and think, God, Mary didn't see me, she might be having a busy day. When she rings you that evening, you're like, Mary, I saw you today, you looked under pressure. Your behavior and how you act towards her is completely different. Yeah. So it is about, I suppose, looking at that thought pattern that we have and seeing if it's having an impact on how we're behaving.
Right. So it's analyzing processes of behavior, asking the why as opposed to to finger pointing, essentially.
Yeah, asking the why and then changing the why if it's not fitting with reality, because we're making assumptions. We're assuming that somebody is acting in a particular way because we've done something or something is happening, and we're not fitting it with facts. So in CBT, when I'm dealing with clients, we're dealing with the facts. It's not, oh, I feel like this might happen, or I think this might happen, or this happened and I feel this. Yes, we look at feelings, obviously, but I want the facts as well. So how do you know that's going to happen? Do you have evidence to support it? And that's how we break that process in our brains. So when our neurons are meeting within the brain, they're forming connections all the time. So all our behaviors are learned. We've either seen our parents do it or we've learned to behave in a particular way. So it's about looking at it and saying, I can actually change this way of thinking. So, for example, one of the techniques we would use in CBT would be cognitive restructuring, which is restructuring that thinking process. So I might have a thought and it's not based on reality or based on fact. So what I'll do with it is I'll try to put the facts into it. What are my facts to support it? Every negative thought that I'm having, we call them ANTs, automatic negative thoughts. Every one of those that I'm having, if I'm writing down facts to support it, then after a certain amount of time, you start actually saying, oh, maybe actually this thought process isn't actually based on reality. So if you were to have an MRI before you started cognitive restructuring, and you did it every day for 10 minutes, or every time you had a negative thought, you reframed it, you looked at a different way of thinking at it. If you had an MRI then afterwards, that process would actually be seen on the MRI, because you'd have those new neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
We can unlearn behaviors that we have learned.
That's fascinating, because
I
think we all do it. I thought it was just me, but it's very difficult to get out of that mindset, though. If you do think something is because of something else, and then you've got
Absolutely.
it in your mindset, and it affects everything that you do for years.
Absolutely. Listen, I'm a primary school teacher, and I was a primary school teacher for nearly 20 years, and I've had anxiety for a lot longer than that. And I remember going to my GP, actually, probably in my mid-20s, with a pain in my chest, convinced I was having a heart attack. Absolutely, like, this is it. Nearly saying goodbye to my parents, getting out of the car, like. And he handed me a piece of paper, and I was like, oh, here I go into A&E now. I'll be waiting hours. It's Limerick University Hospital. And it was actually a CBT therapist name on it.
Oh, I thought he had just handed you a piece of paper that said, would you ever fuck me?
I think this was his way of asking me to. So, I was kind of walking out a little bit insulted, thinking, why isn't he taking me seriously? I'm obviously having a heart attack. Obviously not, because I'm here like 10 years later. So I rang the therapist up, and I said, look, my doctor thinks maybe like some of these physical symptoms are related to anxiety. And I went to her very skeptical, and it absolutely worked. And I actually went on to work in that practice. So when I would say to clients, I've sat in that chair, I had literally sat in that chair. It's like, no, I've actually sat in that chair. So I know what it's like to, I think it's really scary to embark on something that will take a little bit of practice. There's 168 hours in the week. I had to double check that before I come on. I didn't just do the sums in my head.
Yeah.
168.
Really well prepared.
Yeah, really well. Look at my notes. No, 168 hours in the week, 1 hour of therapy if you're doing CBT or counselling. So it has to be practiced at home. It's kind of like applying it. The application part is really, really important, because that's the part that will start firing those neurons in the brain. That's the, that old pathway that's there with the anxious thoughts. That's eventually like the old road that's been bypassed. Now everybody's going to go on the new motorway, and that one.
Take the M50 with Nicola Culloty.
Yeah. Imagine. No, it's like space in the brain is at a complete premium. So if I'm not using something like, I was teaching Irish for years, within primary school, and when then I went and did support working in the school. I was working in disadvantaged areas, so I was working as a Home School Community Liaison with parents. Didn't use Irish at all. Went back teaching again. Oh my God, like it was gone for me, because I'm not using it all the time. So anything we've learned, unless we keep using it, it goes from us. So that's actually a really good thing with anxious thoughts.
Muscle, right? I mean, to be positive in itself is a muscle that needs to be exercised, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You have to be conscious of it in order to, number one, to be mindful of other people, but also to be polite. I mean, it doesn't come easily to us, but equally to be negative or to be a bit of an asshole is a lot harder work, right?
It is, yeah. I think it's just sometimes it can be learned. So CBT is very here and now. We focus on what's happening now. We focus on the future. Yes, we acknowledge what's happened in the past, but it's very goal focused. It's very much what goals do you want from therapy? Breaking it into those bite-sized pieces. Right. So we acknowledge what's happened in the past, but some of that may have been learned behavior, traumas, those moments where you're in primary school and the whole class are laughing at you about something, and they've forgotten about it, and 30 years later you're thinking, oh, I still remember that time.
Yeah.
30 years later, it's happening to us tonight. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we acknowledge the past, but we try not to stay there. We try to make it really kind of goal focused, moving forward. Let's look at the here and now. You know, people will often hang on to things and say, when I say, how do you know that's going to happen? Oh, well, it happened to me before. Well, just because it happened before, it doesn't mean it's going to happen again.
Absolutely. One of the reasons why particularly I wanted to involve the practice of cognitive behavioural therapy as part of this night was I was surprised over the last couple of years how many writers, directors, actors I know who are successful that practice CBT but don't openly talk about it. So how do you think the practice of this can help, say, writers, for example, or directors or performers?
Yeah, I think because it's there are behavioural techniques within it. And there's also cognitive, obviously, so thinking, but also doing. So it can be applied. There's probably thousands of actual techniques that can be used. One size doesn't fit all, but it is about that internal dialogue. It is about what conversation you're actually having with yourself. You know, those kind of thoughts that we have every day that have an impact on, you know, that self-sabotage talk that we have, that, oh, this isn't going to work out for me, or, oh, I'm going to, you know, mess up the podcast, or I'm going to be nervous about it and people will see through it. It's almost like now that we can't be human anymore.
Yeah.
So we're trying to be perfect. There's, you know, this real fear and anxiety around making a mistake or not being able to, you know, if it's a writer, like writer's block, things like that, total normal part of a creative process. Any, you know, writers you look at all have experienced at some stage, have all experienced a writer's block, a moment of, what am I going to do now? And it is being a little bit kind of creative about it and saying, maybe, I often say, you know, Usain Bolt, when he's standing at the starting line, at no point is he thinking, I can do this. I don't know if I have it in me today. Like, he's not. And I do believe in positive psychology, but I think I believe more in like rational, real psychology. What are the chances? I've often said to people, you know, who are afraid that something will happen, okay, let's actually work out the chances of that happening. So if somebody's afraid that you know, something's going to happen when they're flying, okay, then I'm on Flight Radar on my mobile and I'm showing them all of the planes over Dublin. And then we zoom out and we're looking over UK, actually looking at it, because I can tell myself that I'm going to win the lotto. Way too early now yet, but like I'm expecting a bing later on to tell me I have.
Me too.
I don't know, like, that it's going to happen. Just because I tell myself that it's going to happen, it doesn't mean that it isn't. But what about imagining that actually it did? If nothing else, you've got like 10 minutes when you're on a beach in the Bahamas and it's not so bad. So sometimes, you know, there's a technique that I've used with people who are creative, acting if. And it's literally act as if you have done it in your head, instead of thinking that when you get on stage, everybody's going to, you know, think you're terrible or they're not going to be into the performance. How about you actually think for the next 5 minutes that you're amazing on stage and you're acting as if. And when you do that, you set off all of those, you know, our brain finds it really hard to distinguish between reality and what's not real. So, you know, that's why, like what you were saying, Paul, that's why, you know, that positive thing, it can work. Those positive thought process, that can absolutely work, because you start off this reaction in the brain where you're almost thinking you're doing it. It's the exact same with the opposite. If I'm sitting here thinking I'm going to be terrible when I get on stage, then I get that feeling in my stomach, I have all those physical symptoms, and then your body starts operating from that fight or flight back part of your brain, the part of the brain that we needed to run away from the bears when we were cavemen.
Mm-hmm.
But we've evolved so much now that we have other parts of the brain. You know, we've the front part of the brain, which we use for thinking. But if I'm standing and there's a bear behind me, I'm not thinking. I'm literally either flying, running away, or I'm going to fight. So what was the question again? About writers.
Well, just about what you're saying there, it is sort of a fake it until you make it. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
It is, yeah, okay.
And everyone, sorry,
I interrupted you there. I was just on the fake until you make it. It's kind of like you're tricking your brain. You can basically persuade your brain one thing, and then once the connections once your neuron whatever make the connections, then that's what you believe, and then that's what you actually think as a person.
Absolutely. And it's about keeping that thought process there then, because as I said, like space in the brain, it's not used for things that we don't use anymore. So if I was to ask either of you, I'm going back to the Irish now again. If I was to ask either of you to talk in Irish, like on Wilcadigo, maybe. Oh, brilliant. I'm not going to answer back now because I can't think. But it's like if we don't use something, brain says, no, I'm going to need that space for something else. So I'm just going to get rid of it.
What about them 80s songs that you hear on the radio and you know all the lyrics to? How does that work then?
Oh, you know what? That's amazing. And that's the other thing. We don't know everything. So I'm going to write it down for tomorrow. All my notes here, Ray, and that's what you asked me. I think that's because in the 80s, we listened to it over and over again. It's like riding a bike.
It's programmed. Yeah, it's ingrained in us.
Yeah, it is. And it may be there. So, for example, when I was, going to a CBT therapist, and then I went on and, went back to college and did my CBT. And then we were hit with this pandemic that I don't know that I was anticipating 6 months, well, maybe not 6 months ago, last year. So I felt like I was getting a bit anxious, and I thought, oh man, I need to get out my journal here, practice what I preach, did a bit of cognitive restructuring, completely came back to me, even though I hadn't used it for years myself. But I was sitting down talking to clients about it all the time. And yeah, it worked. Like the 80s song, all came back to me. And I realized that pathway was still there. I just needed to kind of dust it off a little bit.
Right.
Nicola, I might ask you, do you think that Irish people in particular have a propensity to be overly modest and tend to be harder on themselves? Like, the old, we don't take compliments well, maybe the hangover from imperialism, I don't know, the apologetic kind of attitude when we enter a room, even in terms of the fact that we use the word sorry pretty consistently.
Absolutely. This is an opinion now, not based on fact, because I don't have it. But for me, yeah, I think that we're afraid people are going to think we're full of ourselves, or that we're boastful, or, back in your box now kind of thing. Let's not, get too big for our station, or, that, yeah, we are overly modest, and that we're, like you said, apologetic almost, or I think we struggle with confidence. Mm-hmm. And again, that's a massive generalization now, but it's just from my own experience. We find it hard to take a compliment. Like, we've all seen the memes, like thanks pennies kind of thing. We find, don't we though? Like, it's really, really hard. I don't think I've ever gotten a compliment about something I'm wearing without saying how much it was, whether it was on sale, or, or downplaying. And I think our brains respond to that. Our brains respond to us saying, don't get too big for your boots now, play it safe. Let's not think too big here, because you mightn't get it.
And can I interrupt you? Sorry.
Yes,
does that then create a new path that's a more negative path and then turn into essentially a vicious cycle.
Yeah, a lot of the negative thought process that we have are very like it's a cycle, and it can be that downward spiral, but something can set it off. So something can set it off. Maybe you're working and somebody says, I'm not sure that was good enough. And then your internal dialogue, even on a subconscious level, might be, well, actually, I remember that time when you were in fifth class, no offense to any teachers, you know, and your fifth class teacher said, not sure that's good enough, go down and do it again. And we remember. So as much as we get rid of those pathways, like there's a body of evidence there to show that we remember traumas. And what might be a trauma for one person may not be a trauma for somebody else. But it's very, we remember, and it can set us off again. And it's what the trigger is. And it's about identifying that trigger then and saying,
I think I've identified my trigger. It's Liverpool winning the league again this year.
Yeah, I've noticed that.
Because when I was a kid, I used to get constantly mocked because I was a Man United fan. This is before the upsurge of. I'm kind of joking, but I'm kind of half joking about this. It could be something as minimal as something like that.
Absolutely, it can be such a small thing, but it all depends on what physical reaction you had and what was triggered in the brain that sent that response to the body. Okay. So at some stage you felt like all Liverpool fans were absolutely taking the piss out of you.
Well, they are now, but yeah.
Yeah. So there was something, totally hadn't planned for this, Paul.
Live therapy.
It's called
there was something in when you were younger that obviously did trigger that, maybe.
Yeah, really bad example. But can you maybe fill us in on or give us some examples of maybe some exercises that people might do or that you would do with someone depending on what they were doing?
Yeah, I think there's loads, as I said, but it isn't a one size fits all. And I always not put a disclaimer out, but you know, there's loads of CBT self-help books there. There are different techniques that you can use, but it's always good if you're feeling like you have low mood or you're anxious to actually go and talk to somebody. Mm-hmm. And I did a Facebook post on this recently, but pick a sound one. Literally hashtag pick a sound one. Pick somebody that you'll get on with and that you'll have that rapport with, because that relationship is absolutely massive. Yeah. That's the disclaimer part. So some of the techniques you can use, there's loads. So one of the main ones I will do with people straight away is a thought diary to identify those triggers. So when you're having thoughts, you may not realize it's your thoughts. You're having anxious moments and you're wondering what's setting you off. So I'll ask people to keep a log, keep a diary of those thoughts, what the triggers are, what the physical symptoms you're having, and then what you did and what the actual thought is, writing down that actual thought. When you do that over a period of time, you then have a log of, I suppose, maybe there's a recurring pattern, maybe there's something that's kind of triggering you, and maybe there is that theme to it. Maybe it's one of self-doubt, maybe it's one of real worry and fear. So when we can compile the thoughts, then we can start applying facts to them, which is the cognitive restructuring. And it is literally what it says on the tin. Restructuring, reframing what that thought is. So, you know, if somebody's at work and they say that their boss came into them and said, can you redo this? That's not the way I wanted it. And the boss may mean absolutely nothing by it, just literally, can you redo it? It's not what I wanted. That person can internalize that then and say, oh my God, I'm after really messing up and I always do this. And last week this happened to me again with somebody else. And it becomes a real, like you said, Ray, a real spiral. So it's about restructuring, saying, what are the actual facts? So what actually happened? I was asked to redo it and then I felt really upset. Okay, I'm acknowledging your feelings, but because you feel something, it doesn't mean that that person meant something else by it or that you're useless. It literally means we have to change it. So applying facts to it, cognitive restructuring. Another good one is it's like a relaxation. It is a relaxation method, but it's a little bit different to, you know, meditation, where it's progressive muscle relaxation. So if I said to the two of you now, relax.
Yeah, ba-dum.
Okay, yeah, ba-dum. So you'd relax. But sometimes we don't realize we're tense in places at all. So if you say to somebody, relax, then I might think I'm relaxed. The only way I'm going to know I'm relaxed is if I tense, first of all. So progressive muscle relaxation is a technique in CBT where we tense the muscles first, we work that muscle group, and then we relax them. So if you clench your fists, okay, really tight and hold it, and then relax it. There's more of a sense of relaxation in that than if I just said, relax your hands. Because
is that like the thing when you're a kid in the schoolyard and you put your hands like that and you put them really tight, and then when you let go, your hands go up like this?
I don't know.
He's going to say yes to that question.
That's another one I'm going to have to look up.
Okay.
I may ask
Not in
you
any
well,
schools in Limerick anyway, Ray. I don't know.
I'll just ask you as well, just off aside to that for a second. Do you feel how important is it in your line of work to work when you're working with someone? You're both obviously working on a project which happens to be someone's productivity or potential, or you know, making the most of their potential and so on. How important is it to say that you don't know, or you'll figure something out, and not knowing all the answers? Is that important? You know, that kind of transparency when you're working with someone. It's not about who has the answer, it's about kind of figuring out a result. Is that important?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for me it's never, and people may disagree sometimes. It's, you know, people talk a lot around boundaries and rules, and yeah, they're so important. But for me, I'm not, you know, I don't have a million psychology books behind me. Mm-hmm. What I'm doing is I'm helping somebody to identify their thoughts. Yeah. And I'll always say, okay, give me everything, like give me all the information that you can think of. I'm going to look at this and put together like a case formulation, we call it, some techniques that may be helpful. And then we'll talk together. I'm not telling the person. We'll have a chat and I'll say, this is a technique. What do you think? Do you like the sound of it? Will we try it? And they'll try it for a certain amount of time. And yeah, some people have come back and said, not sure that technique worked for me. And we'll change it up. But it's really, really important for me that it's collaborative. So we're working together. It's your goals as, you know, a client, like it's your person as the person who is seeking out therapy to help you with something specifically. Something else can come up, you know, it can be a few weeks into it, and you know, there might be a bit of a discovery that actually this might be coming from this, and or a new life event might come up, and then it's about adapting to that. But yeah, like I don't think there's the perfect therapist or the person who knows it all. It's very much guided discovery. It's me asking certain questions. There's certain questioning techniques. You know, some people will go to the worst case scenario and leave it there. So some people will hear that there's a storm coming and say, oh my God, the tree's going to fall in the house. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to say, okay, let's not leave it there. Let's actually explore that and see what the fear is around that. So I'll ask those difficult questions, but it's in a real supportive, I think, real supportive environment where people can actually thrash out those fears that they have.
Okay. I suppose we can talk forever about this. Do you think, why do you think that creatives in particular, are more susceptible to feelings of self-doubt or lack of self-worth, poor self-esteem and so on? What do you think that might be?
I think from my experience, from my research, there's, I suppose, a lot of, I think this fits with all categories, all, occupations at time. But for some people, they can go into their work and do their job and come home. And for other people, like creative people, there's, it's being judged in a way. And I mean that really like nicely. So when you stand on stage and audition, then there's people that are judging your performance and making a decision based on it. And you're looking, when you're standing on stage, saying, they're making that decision based on me. But the facts of it are, they're making that decision based on a lot of other things, and it's not personal. So we do internalize. There can be, there was actually a research study done decades ago now on creative people and the different categories. And they found 4 different categories of creative people. And people who were experiencing, I suppose, anxiety, I should say, and creative. All of them were unhappy with different things. There were anxious people. Those people were really self-critical. There were people who were angry, who didn't want to be kind of compared to others. There were disengaged people who lacked that motivation, maybe going through a little bit of a block. And then there were like disappointed people who felt like they were going to be judged or that their work wasn't good enough. And out of those 4 categories, all of those people who were doing the trial at the time, the psychologist working with them, he looked at applying a guided kind of imagery, trying to kind of start that process again. It worked with all of them. And it worked with them because they were anxious. They were either self-critical, they were lacking motivation, but something had just stopped that progress. So it's definitely about doing whatever you can do. Journaling. I can't think of his name now. Graham Greene. He's like a writer. You probably know him. I wasn't too familiar, but apparently he was like a leading novelist. But he kept a dream journal, and he did that when he was younger and he had mental health issues. And when he had writer's block later on in his life, after he had won like a Nobel Prize for literature and that, he went back to his dream journal as a way of, I suppose, creating content. And I think it's about, as well, we call it successive approximation, breaking it into little bits. What do I need to do? So instead of like writing the whole book, or it's literally about chapter by chapter. When this lockdown started, I think it's funny because I was thinking of this the other day when I was thinking about like creative people and block, and I started putting workshops together for kids and for CBT and life skills and things like that. And I sat down one day and said, I'm actually going to write a children's book. I was going to write a story. So I sat down, wrote the story. I think it was about 40 minutes, probably took a break in the middle. So it was probably about 30 minutes of writing. And I'm not saying that for any praise, like it's probably going to be like in the press outside for the next 10 years. But there was no pressure on me to do it. And I think that can be the difference sometimes. I didn't put pressure on myself because I was like, I'm not a writer. Like, this is grand. Sure, nobody, if it doesn't work, see it. But when you're putting so much of yourself into something and you know that it's going to be, I suppose people are going to have an opinion of it. Yeah, it's about being able to accept that criticism. Sometimes it's not that, that criticism that we, like you were saying, Paul, I think maybe it was all over the world. I just know my experience in Ireland that we can be self-critical, we can be critical of others. So maybe we are really, really critical, and maybe it is about looking at it and saying, why am I doing this? And maybe that criticism can be constructive. And maybe it is about that confidence work. You know, there are techniques to build that confidence, but I do believe that a lot of it is based on that thought process. If that thought process can be based on fact and not on fiction, then it really does have a knock-on effect on how you feel and how you behave as well.
So you'd suggest that if anybody is overwhelmed with pressure, for example, that they need to find a coping strategy in order to alleviate that pressure?
Absolutely, yeah. And it might be a few different ones. You might be doing like meditation, mindfulness. You might be looking at those thoughts and trying to reframe them. You might be faking it till you make it, literally imagining that what you're, you know, if you're going for an audition, or that your book is actually really successful, or instead of finding, I suppose, that alternative view and having a different lens on it, because the lens that we can have can be very negative when it's to do with ourselves. So when we look at it, it can, like, we can really, and I know, like, from experience, that even though I wrote the book in 30 minutes, like, I did send it off to somebody just to like get a little bit of a taster.
Like, you're fucking great.
Well, no, absolutely. Your man rang me and he was like, oh my God, we need to work on this. God, I think I nearly cried. I was like, oh my God, I know I wrote it in half an hour, but I thought it was great. But so I know, like, we are really, really vulnerable to it, because it's us, and we take it really, really, we take it on. So when you're thinking more rationally, and when it might be more positive, or you're not carrying a lot with you, and you break it down, then things like that may not affect you as much.
Okay. Right. I think we have to leave it there, and we're going to have a little bit of a break. But where can people find you, Nicola, if they would like to work with you?
I'm at Full Circle CBT on Facebook and Instagram, and I can give you my details as well later on as well. So it's Nicola@fullcircle.com.
Super stuff. Thanks so much for that. Just from my own perspective, it's really interesting to look at new ways of working, but also to know that there are people out there that really want to help other people. We'll share your page and your email and stuff with our networks and stuff as well. Listen, mind yourself.
And you.
That was really helpful and really interesting. Thank you.
Thanks a million.
Okay.
Talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks a million. We're going to take a 5-minute break, guys. Thanks so much. Yeah, take care, and thanks a million. We'll be in touch soon.
Brilliant.